Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Payan. I'm the director of the Claudio X. Gonzalez Center for the U.S. and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute. As you well know, immigration is one of the key issues of our time. In that public policy space, we have seen quite a bit of change, and we do not yet know where we will end up. But we do know that current immigration policy will have short, medium, and long-term consequences for our demography, our economics, and for the composition of our society, and even for our scientific advantage, as many of our scientists come from abroad, and even our businesses as immigrants are responsible for a very large percentage of new business and enterprises in this country. As the Trump administration moves to restrict immigration on many levels, not just documented, but also legal immigration, we meet here to contemplate what are those consequences and what they mean for the future of the United States. So, without any further ado, let me introduce our moderator today, Linda Laurel. Linda, a good partner of the Baker Institute on Immigration Issues, is a journalist. Linda anchored the evening news at Houston's NBC affiliate for 17 years. She's also the CEO and executive producer of Linda Laurel Media and co-founded a new democracy initiative, the Civil Dialogues. With that, let me just hand the microphone over to you, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tony, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for starting your day with us. We know you could be many places, but obviously you care about this issue. You want to engage with us, and we want to engage with you. We will be having a significant portion of the program for audience Q&A for those of you here in the room and also those of you online. So do be thinking of your questions, and once we get started, I will then come down and get you into the conversation as well. Well, as we all know, when it comes to immigration in America, things on the ground change hour by hour, even minute by minute, as President Trump makes good on his campaign promise to secure the border and ramp up deportation efforts. Before I introduce our panel, I thought it might be helpful to share just a few statistics to help frame the conversation. The September statistics from Customs and Border Protection show there were 8,386 Border Patrol apprehensions on the southwest border. That's 95% lower than the monthly average of the Biden administration. According to U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement, 59,760 people are currently being held in detention. 71.5% of those in detention do not have a criminal conviction. Immigrants without criminal records have become the largest group in detention. The Texas Tribune reports that Texas has the second largest population of undocumented immigrants in the country, with more than 1.6 million of the estimated 13.7 million nationally. From President Trump's inauguration on January 20th to July 29th, ICE made 138,068 arrests nationwide. 24% of them were right here in the state of Texas. NPR reviewed deaths recorded by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement and found 20 people have died in ICE custody so far this year. That's the most since 2005. According to the Department of Homeland Security, more than 2 million illegal immigrants have left the United States, including 1.6 million who have voluntarily self-deported, and there have been more than 527,000 deportations. We all know the U.S. is experiencing a labor shortage across multiple industries, including healthcare, agriculture, construction, and more. While declining fertility rates are certainly one of many reasons for the labor shortage, so are declining immigration rates. A recent survey by the Association of General Contractors found that 92% of construction firms report they are having a difficult time finding enough people to hire. So it's no wonder that workforce shortages are the leading cause of construction project delays. So, with all of that in mind, it's time now to welcome our panelists and begin our conversation. Stan Merrick is president and CEO of the Merrick family of companies, one of the largest interior contractors in the Southwest. Stan is the proud descendant of immigrants from Czechoslovakia, his ancestors having survived several years of homelessness. That history and his employment of several dreamers among the thousands who work for him are just a couple of reasons why Stan has spent the last 25 years working toward meaningful immigration reform. He is a major proponent of a solution called ID and Tax, which we will discuss this morning. Please welcome Stan Merrick. Elizabeth Mendoza is a solo practitioner focusing on immigration law since 1993. A graduate of Rice University and the University of Houston Law Center, Elizabeth has dedicated her career to representing immigrants in removal proceedings and in family, humanitarian, and consular-based cases. Liz has provided pro bono assistance throughout her career to local organizations such as Catholic Charities and the YMCA. She is a frequent speaker at immigration conferences and local churches, informing the community about their rights. Please welcome Liz Mendoza. You just met Tony Payan, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him. Tony is the Claudio X. Gonzalez Fellow in U.S.-Mexico Studies, the Francoise and Edward Jurigian Fellow for Mexico Studies, and the Executive Director of the Center for U.S. and Mexico here at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Tony has been researching immigration issues for 2.5 decades, with an emphasis on border studies, particularly the U.S.-Mexico border. He has authored, co-authored, or edited nearly 20 volumes on his research, in addition to numerous book chapters, monographs, white papers, issue briefs, and journal articles. Please welcome Tony Payan. Jeremy Robbins is Executive Director of the American Immigration Council. Previously, Jeremy spent more than a decade as the first and sole Executive Director of New American Economy, the think tank and advocacy organization founded by Michael Bloomberg to make the economic case for smarter immigration policies. Prior to that, Jeremy served as a policy advisor and special counsel in the Office of New York City Mayor and as a judicial law clerk on the United States Court of Appeals. Please welcome Jeremy Robbins. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so let's get this conversation started. And Jeremy, I actually do want to begin with you and ask you, in your role as Executive Director of American Immigration Council, what is top of mind for you in this current environment as you watch what the Trump administration is doing with immigration enforcement?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tony and Rice for having me. Top of mind right now, there's a recent poll that came out that shows that more Americans than ever in the history of Gallup polling think immigration is good for this country. At the same time, if you look at polling data and you look at the policies of President Trump, the most popular policy he has by a decent margin is mass deportation. And so one thing that is very top of mind for me is, how do you reconcile those two? How do you think about a world where people think immigration is great, but they also think that it's kind of chaos and that we don't have control over our system? And while they may not like, I say it's his most popular policy, it's still under 50%, there really isn't an alternative. And so I think about the charge of the work of folks like us on the panel. It's like, how do we come up with another way that makes sense to take control of our immigration system in a way that is pro-immigration?
So, okay, we need to talk about solutions, but before we do that, I want to find out what's top of mind for you, Stan, as an employer, someone in the construction industry. You have, I think the mic is already on. You have thousands of workers in multiple states, and I know that you do big projects. How are you dealing with the workforce shortage in your particular case, and what are you and your fellow employers concerned about in this current environment?
Well, in all my years of being in the construction business, I've never seen as much work on the books. You've got the infrastructure bills, the highways.
Stan, hold it a little closer to yourself.
Highways, hospitals, schools. I mean, there's more work than we can do. Then you throw in the data centers and all of these things that are dealing with. So we're looking at the biggest workforce shortage we've ever seen. If we do nothing as far as deporting the workers we have today. We haven't been attracting workers into the trades for years. We took vocational training out of the high schools. We're bringing it back in now, but it's a little late. And with a declining birth rate, we just don't have as many people. So I don't know how we're going to get the work done that's on the books with the way things are. And every year, and I respect the president for securing the border. That's something 5 different presidents told me they were going to do and never even came close. And you can't fix what's here until you secure the border and then start chipping away on the interior. And I'm not talking about deporting them. There is a better solution we'll talk about. But we're going to be in a crisis mode very, very soon. And the more deportations we see, whether it's self-deportations or ICE action, the harder it's going to be. And I'm not just talking about construction. I was talking to one of my good friends at MD Anderson. A lot of work going on there. He's worried about janitors. There's nobody to clean the patient rooms for the next patient to come in. And think about all these buildings, all these hospitals. Who do you think cleans these every day? Does the landscaping? Does the food service? It's not just construction. It's a lot of trades. And we need to come up with a solution fast.
When you say you're not yet at crisis level, what does crisis level look like for you?
If we have ICE show up at a building like over here on this, right here, there will be several people who will be taken away in restraints because we have an immigrant workforce that many of them are here working under fake IDs or whatever. And as an employer, we have to check them the best we can, but we don't have a government database. People say, well, E-Verify. Well, E-Verify doesn't work. If they've got your name and your number, you're on the job. So, we need some way to identify our immigrant workforce, and facial recognition is the solution. So if we start losing people on housing projects, go out there and the county and see workers walking on the roofs and things, they'll be gone. Most of those people have been here a long time, but they've never had a way to get legal status. A blue-collar worker, the last time he had an opportunity to get 1986, President Reagan's Immigration Reform Act. No way to do it. People come, we work them. There hadn't been any enforcement for 40 years. And now we're seeing the enforcement, and it's not going to be pretty. I've been fighting this a long time, and I love our workers. I mean, this is one of our projects. And this is done by an immigrant workforce primarily. And they maybe didn't have much schooling, maybe didn't even get the grade, but they can build. They're natural artisans. These are people that have been here a long. We need to figure out a way to keep these people because we need them. And I'm hopeful that as bad as this situation is, it will eventually cause us, the business community, everybody, to rise up and say, let's fix it. Let's fix it sensibly. Mm-hmm. Let's don't do something drastic. Let's do it sensibly.
So Tony, talk a little bit about what the data are showing you about the economic impact. Let's talk about the economic impact first, and we'll talk about mental health and other things down the road. But what are the numbers showing you that we can expect as a result of this enforcement policy?
Yeah, I think it'll depend on at the end on how many immigrants are removed from the economy, but probably just under 80% of the immigrants in this country are formally employed. They pay taxes, and obviously when we talk about taxes, many of them are using fewer and fewer, but are using Social Security numbers, either borrowed or fake, or many of the DACA recipients obviously are formally employed, so they pay all kinds of payroll taxes to the government. They produce wealth themselves, and whatever they buy, in Texas, it's 8.25% sales tax. So they're contributing to the economy, not just building wealth, but they're actually paying taxes at many different levels. Many of them have mortgages because they used to be able to get mortgages, so they pay property taxes. And what I feel is that if you subtract a good percentage of the population, 5%, 4%, 3%, whatever it is, there's going to be economic consequences. And what Stan said is really important to consider. Think about the fact that if you suddenly don't have the workforce, let's say for construction, then the projects are going to be delayed. And when the projects are delayed, the building is not going to be delivered. And every delay costs money. So by simply just going out and taking out the immigrants out of the workforce, they're a very important component of the workforce in specific sectors. If you take out the agricultural workers, we're going to see it in the prices of food in the supermarket. So the consequences, the economic consequences, sort of will ripple down. There'll be a ripple effect on prices, on delayed projects, which cost more money, and there'll be fewer taxes paid by immigrants. So I don't think we have estimated the consequences of removing an important part of the workforce. And if you think about the baby boomer generation, which is retiring still at a fast pace, it's really the children of immigrants that are replacing those workers and taxpayers. So I think that we need to do really a very good calculation of how many billions, perhaps trillions of dollars we're talking about. This will be a considerably smaller economy if we remove all the immigrants, especially because we're also going after not just the undocumented, we're also going after documented immigrants. We're removing green card holders and the DACA recipients, or as of right now, still got work permits. If we remove them, and then if we drop the visas like the H-1B, for example, and then we lose a lot of scientists, teachers, programmers, and on, then we're simply just shrinking the economy. So I think we need to consider all the different aspects that trickle down from having an immigrant participating in the workforce, and that is not just the wealth they produce, is all the taxes and the contributions and the consumption. Will be a much smaller economy, I think.
And of course, behind all of these numbers are humans, human beings who are being impacted in ways that are difficult to imagine. And Liz, I'd like for you to help the audience understand what you're seeing in your immigration practice as you are helping your clients through this time.
Thank you, Linda. And I'd like to thank the Baker Institute and Tony and Linda and Jean for inviting me to participate. So what I'm seeing in my community is a tremendous amount of anxiety, fear, and frustration. And a lot of it is focused around my American citizen clients who are in mixed status families. So I can give you an example. One client in particular is an honorably discharged Marine married to someone in Dhaka. Her family brought her over here when I think she was a toddler, 1 or 2 years old. And her mom and dad didn't take her to court like she was supposed to go. She wound up with a removal order, a deportation order, and she's here, she's married, they have children, they bought a house together, they file income tax returns together every year, she has no criminal record, she graduated from college, she's gainfully employed, she has a work permit, she has a social security number, but the only protection that she has legally under immigration laws is DACA. And so while she and her husband, an American citizen, are winding their way through the immigration process to try and get her a green card, it's DACA that protects her. And so we have these programs, temporary protected status, DACA, that we've had for years that have given different populations of immigrants some certainty, some stability to become a part of our community. That's all gone. And so it creates a tremendous amount of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety because you're constantly walking on a tightrope. How do you continue navigating your life if you may not be here tomorrow? So it's very palpable. There's also a lot of fear of racial profiling. There's a lot of fear that even if you are an American citizen, it may not matter. You might get swept up in an ICE arrest. that the immigration system is becoming more severe, more restrictive, and so it's becoming even harder to navigate, getting different kinds of visas, getting a work permit, whether it's through an employer like Stan or through a family member. So everything is becoming more restrictive. And a lot of the frustration isn't just because of what I just described, but because a lot of people see such limited law enforcement resources being focused on people who are clearly not the worst of the worst. But they're being swept up into all of this. And it's frustrating because, as Tony mentioned, a moment ago, so many of administrations are presented with, great ideas and suggestions and policy papers about this. These are ways to try and fix this broken system and to make it more effective to protect our border, our safety, our economy, our national security, and to honor values that we have historically held important. And it doesn't get fixed because politics always gets in the way. And so there's a lot of anxiety, fear, and frustration.
I spoke to you, I guess it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, right before we had our panel prep call preparing for this. And you were a little frenzied because ICE was outside your office. So talk about, from a personal perspective, what this all means for you and how you have changed your personal behavior as you navigate this.
Well, I'm born and raised in Texas. My mom's from Mexico and my dad is from Ecuador. I'm first gen, the daughter of immigrants. Just turned 58, and for the first time in my life, I am now carrying on me documentation to prove that I was born here. I have my passport in my purse right over there. I've never done that in my life. I am in charge for my family of obtaining our passport cards so that we can carry those in our wallets. We all have passports, we have our birth certificates, but we have never contemplated carrying proof on us that we were born here. And I am now in charge of that because the reality for me and my family is that we may be swept up in this ICE enforcement effort, and we might find ourselves in a situation where we have to convince law enforcement that we're American citizens. So it isn't just part of my life work that I represent immigrants and that I'm the daughter of immigrants, but this could touch me and my family in a way that I see it touch my clients every day.
Every day. So Jeremy, I'm sure you hear stories like the ones that Liz just shared, both the personal one and the one of her clients. What are you doing at the American Immigration Council in terms of navigating this area and what you're looking for in terms of solutions, and how are you advocating for that with the administration?
Thank you, Linda. I think it's important to recognize, too, that more has changed in the last 10 months than in the last 60 years around immigration. But the immigration system was broken before January 20th of this year. And a lot of the problems that Liz's clients are seeing are things that have wrapped on for decades, right? The fact that you're not going to have a path to stay here but for DACA, even though you have kids here and everything else, that's wrapped up. So I think when we think at the American Immigration Council of two things. One is, how do we address the real challenges that have come over the last 10 months, and there are many of them, but without losing sight of the fact that we actually need to articulate a proactive vision for the future. And so one of the things I think that has gone wrong on the advocacy side over the last 50 years, which is why we still have this broken system, we haven't had a lot of changes, is that we've done a really bad job of reading the room, right? And so going back to where I started with the polls, Americans are very pro-immigrant, but they are also very nervous about change and the fact that our system feels like it is chaotic. And it is. Like, over the last 4 years, millions of people came here without status. They got work permits. They got in a line that because the only line to get in was asylum. So many people got in that line, even though they have no real chance of getting asylum. Cities really were overwhelmed. And so I think we think of a couple things. First of all, how do we chart another way forward? And that has to start with articulating a vision for how you can keep this country secure that's not mass deportation and chaos and massed unidentified men and the military roaming the streets. And so we're doing a lot of work working with former folks from ICE and others to articulate what does it mean to enforce the law. With that, we're thinking about what would a proactive vision be? How do you have a line that people can get in? Maybe it's ID and tax, like Stan is saying, which I think is a really interesting idea and something to think about. And how do you make communities more welcoming so that immigration feels more like an opportunity and less like a threat? How do you engage at the local level? We worked with Houston to write a welcoming plan for Houston. We're doing that in hundreds of communities. Because I really think at the end of the day, we do need to help immigrants and refugees. We do need to fix the system. But fundamentally, we need to invest really deeply in making communities welcome. Because if it feels like immigration is happening to you, then it really is a threat. And I think that's something that, if you look at what's happening in this country, there's a huge backlash. It's mostly not coming from where immigrants are. The places immigrants are settling are very, very tolerant. It's coming from the places around them where it seems real scary what's happening.
So we're going to talk about ID and tax in just a moment, but Tony, help the audience understand what does it mean to get in line to get legal in this country? What does that mean? Is there a line? You hear people all the time saying, well, they should just get in line. What is the process? What does it take from the time you get into this country to get your legal status?
Yes, let me just give you a couple of examples, and I think Liz may be able to clarify this a little bit better. But if you are undocumented in the country, you're disqualified, really, from becoming a legal permanent resident. So you can't, there's no line for you because you're in administrative violation of U.S. immigration laws. So this is why we have seen an increase in the undocumented population, because even if they've been here for 10, 20, 30 years, even if they're in mixed status families and they have U.S. born children, they cannot, there's no line for them. So the numbers are just going to keep going up as we have seen since the 1990s, I think, when this became the rule. So clearly, there's no line there. Only Congress, I think, can certainly. DACA was an attempt by President Obama, I think in 2012, to get this fixed, or at least a portion of those individuals.
And clarify what DACA is for those who don't know.
Yeah, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was essentially folks that were brought by their parents or somebody else as children, and they kind of grew up in the United States, so they're pretty much acculturated, they're fluent in English, they're practically residents of the United States all their lives, but they had no status. So President Obama was able to do that. It was challenged in court. The court, by a very narrow ruling, I think, allowed it to stand. It's interesting to me that President Trump has not gone after it again. I think I would have suspected that they would have tried to eliminate it completely again. That would affect about 600,000 to 700,000 folks. So there's no line for those who are here, because Congress is the only one that can create a line for or a path to legalization. And then for folks that want to migrate to the United States, it's a very complicated system of caps, national caps, and limits to visas. For example, if you're a Filipino nurse and you want to come and work in the United States or want to migrate to the United States, the lines, because Filipinos and Indians are two of the major groups that are trying to migrate through sort of a professional path, it's a very long line. Some Filipino folks are waiting for 15, 20 years for the opportunity to migrate into the United States. So the line is there, but it's very, very, very long. Priority is given to family reunification, but now we just don't know, because obviously if we cared about family reunification, we'd actually look at mixed status families very carefully and open a path to keep families together. So when we talk about a line to get into the United States, I think there's always been an illusion that there is a way, an easy way to do it. There's no easy way to come legally into the United States. That's just the reality. So I think it's something that we need to discuss and say, look, I understand the law enforcement component. I understand what the president is trying to do. We may or may not disagree with it. I think one of the worst things is that happens when you enforce the law in the way that it's being enforced today, is that we may be losing our own soul in the process. Because to me, the scenes that we see in on TV, with these guys are masked and with plateless cars and grabbing people and beating people and practically assaulting people, separating them from their children. That spectacle shouldn't be the kind of thing that we see in the streets. I understand law enforcement. I get it. We should comply with the law and things like that. But this goes way, way beyond what law enforcement ought to be in an open and free democracy. So I think there is a serious issue, and we should push Congress to really open the paths. You cannot have all law enforcement hammering down on law enforcement and refusing to open the line to ensure that people can come in, those that are here already to stay with their families, and those that want to migrate to the United States, to have a very clear path and open the pathways, because we are going to need immigrants. I think our demographics, our economy, our scientific advantage all shows that immigration feeds those lines. The U.S. is strong because of immigration. If we had zero immigration, as I think the administration believes we should have, and I think they really are driving towards almost zero immigration with very few exceptions, then I think the character of the country would definitely be a little bit more like Europe, an aging nation, an aging population with no replenishment of folks. So the consequence of this could be very long, and let's be clear, the administration is acting on law enforcement. Congress is refusing to open paths for people to be here and to get here. That doesn't exist.
Liz, what can you add to that from your perspective? And also, could you address the Trump administration making it easier, prioritizing refugees coming from South Africa over other countries?
Well, to first piggyback really quick on what Tony just said, we're talking about the long-term impact of immigration, right? Based upon the policy changes that we're seeing with this administration. And we're talking about respecting the need for law enforcement to protect our communities and to protect the border. Well, an unintended consequence that could actually negatively impact our public safety and our communities is that if you're a crime victim or a witness of a crime, and you happen to be here without legal status, you're going to think twice about picking up the phone and calling the police to report that either you're the victim of a crime or you're the witness of a crime, because you may be fearful that call that you make may trigger your own deportation. And so we're already seeing in our communities crime victims, witnesses of crime, deciding, you know what, this isn't safe for me. This is not safe for my family to contact law enforcement, to cooperate with law enforcement, because I might wind up being deported, and then what happens to my significant other, my children, etc. So we're seeing that already. That is already occurring in our communities. With reference to the drastic drop in refugee admissions, I think I read the other day that the admission rate is going to be dropped to 7,500 refugees a year. Under the Biden administration, I think we were around 120,000 a year. Refugees are people who are vetted, thoroughly vetted, outside of the United States before they get on a plane and they arrive in our country. And so we're seeing that this historic compromise and promise that we have to protect people who are the victims of persecution, which really was born more than anything in the wake of World War II and the Holocaust, that we changed our immigration laws to address that, to theoretically try to prevent that from happening, where we were not welcoming the persecuted. Now we're seeing that commitment is being flipped. And now refugee admissions are going to drop to, again, 7,500. And apparently the majority of those admission entrants will be for Afrikaners. So that's caused a tremendous amount of controversy. You know, how are these people being persecuted? And so that's another bone of contention of what we're dealing with in this country, with the policy changes that we're seeing with this administration.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about solutions. And Stan, you've been a proponent, as I mentioned, of the ID and tax solution. So help the audience understand how that would work.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about DACA. You know, DACA was an executive order, 2012. President Obama couldn't get Congress to pass any kind of law. He said, I will, by executive order, have DACA. So if you were brought here before age 16, you would qualify, if background check, tamper-proof ID, work for an employer who pays and matches taxes just like a visa worker, you could get a work permit. You had to, go to high school, college, all this stuff. But, so people were wondering, well, gee whiz, will these kids come out of the shadows and give their information to the government? Within a year, 700,000 signed up. 700,000, a couple of them sitting here, Emiliano over there, and I'm sure there's other dreamers. Incredibly successful program. And when it was closed under Trump's first term, Attorney General Sessions said, we are rescinding the order. We can't deport all the people who are here, but there will be no further people allowed to enroll. So we have 1,700,000 kids. Think of that, 1,700,000 waiting to get into DACA, and they can't. They're graduating from people like U of H, Rice, Harvard, and they can't get a job. And we've spent billions getting them through grade school, high school, in-state tuition in Texas, and we can't get a job. 1,700,000. And the 700,000 that have given all their information to the government are in danger of being deported. There's a judge trying to decide. I mean, the Supreme Court should make a decision. They just kick it down, but it's broken. But anyway, that is an incredible program, some wonderful stories, doctors, lawyers, paramedics. These kids want to be Americans more than my kids do. And I use that with my kids. I just wish you had the passion to be an American like these. Now, we could do the same thing with the people who are here. You said 12, 13 million. So let's say, instead of going out with terrible enforcement, detention camps, let's just say, okay, you come into the office and consent to a background check, and if you're clean, facial recognition, so we know exactly who you are, we're going to give you a 2-year work permit, just like DACA. And then you go to work, pay payroll taxes into the system that you may never get, and you just start it. And people say, well, I've heard people say, well, they're not going to do that. They're scared to death. You talk to anybody, they'll be in the line in the morning because it worked for the kids. Their kids got legal status. So all of a sudden, instead of spending billions of dollars rounding them up, they come into the office voluntarily. Employees like me, I'm going to pick them up. I'd even pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a head to get them into our workforce.
Stan, clarify that you're talking about that they would have to work for a W-2 employer versus a 1099, which is a big difference.
If you get an H-2B visa worker, you're going to have to pay payroll taxes.
Stan, closer, microphone.
Pay payroll taxes. And this would not be a path to citizenship. It wouldn't be where you can get welfare, but you could work, get a driver's license, pay taxes, travel back and forth to your home countries, and it would be an easy deal. But the amazing thing is, for a lot of seniors in here like myself, every million workers that goes onto a W-2 payroll, they pay 7.65% of their wages into the Social Security system, and the employer matches 7.65%. That's 15 cents of every dollar goes into the system. 1 million workers out of the shadow economy onto a W-2 payroll, $5.5 billion per year to Social Security. Multiply that times 10 million, $55 billion a year. We won't have to worry about our Social Security anymore. It will be secure. I mean, it's a no-brainer, and it wouldn't cost the government a cent. And it's common sense. And so all these people have consented to a background check. They've got facial recognition. When I hire somebody, my God, I finally know who they are and that they're legal to work in the U.S. Every employer I talk to, every hospital, every government, they all love it. Now, why can't we do it?
Why can't we do it, Jeremy? Why would something like this not work? I'm just asking you the really easy questions, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's a real political issue, right? Which is that people are afraid, and it's really easy to use fear. And so if you look at whether it's politicians who are afraid of being tagged as pro-amnesty, or whether it's media, which realizes that you get a lot of clicks when you stir up fear. I mean, we're about to enter, so the election happened last Tuesday. With the election after being done from last Tuesday, we're now in the midterm election cycle. It starts this week. There are going to be hundreds of millions of dollars of ads that are spent casting immigrants as criminals, as invaders, at the same time as taking all of your jobs. There are going to be about $0 spent on pro-immigration ads. So the messages coming in are intense and are scary. So I think one of the things that we have to start with is we have to convince Americans that we're very, very serious about not recreating the problem. People point back to Ronald Reagan's amnesty in 1986 and said he gave 3 million people were given legal status, and now there are 13 million undocumented immigrants in the country. So how do we show that not only are we going to create a line for people to get in, you can get real, but that we're making sure that the people who are going to come the right way, and that gets to dealing with Tony's reality of there has to be a line to get in. But we have to convince people that we are very serious about enforcing the laws, and we have to come up with a humane way to do it.
And let me just add on that about why the 86 Act didn't work. As an employer, we were now required to fill out what's called an I-9 immigration form. And we had to ask for a social security number and one of 34 different IDs. And back until 2012, everybody had driver's license. If you were a resident of Texas, even if you were undocumented, you just had to show you lived on you got a driver's license. So all those years from 1986 to 2012, we're hiring all these people, and anybody, the Social Security card came out in 1935. You can get it at any flea market. You can make it yourself with your computer. So we were getting all of these, the stuff coming in, and had no way to verify if that person was legal or not. And even after, and then that was 86. And now today, though, the reason it will work today, we have digital fingerprints. We have facial recognition. We have a database that the government could set up immediately. I mean, MasterCard could do it. Anybody could do it, where we know exactly who those people are, when we hire them, where they live, what their wage rate. I mean, it's there, the technology. So there is no excuse that we can't do it today, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, and just to add one thing to that. I mean, if you look at who is coming here, my grandmother left a town called Tahansha, Russia, now Ukraine, because there were pogroms. She left because of violence, and the town doesn't exist anymore. She kept walking and get on a boat because she wanted a better economic life. She looked a lot like the people who are coming to our southern border. The reality is people are coming to work. If you look at the undocumented population, more than 90% of the undocumented population is working, is of working age and working. That is so much higher than any other population of individuals in this country. And so if you're right, like we have a magnet that says that there is work here for you and this is a better life. And so a huge part of controlling who comes here and who doesn't, there is a part of it that really does have to do with the southern border. There is a much bigger part of it that has to do with exactly what Stan's talking about, which is making sure we have control over who is working and who is not. But it is that you have to have a real comprehensive approach. If you turn that off overnight and you had 13 million people who couldn't get a job and were here, that's a huge societal problem. So you have to think about how do we have a system where we are thinking about the realities of today and the realities of tomorrow.
Tony, I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we're talking about here with these comments is the narrative. We have allowed folks like Stephen Miller to capture the narrative and to criminalize immigration and portray immigration as a huge disadvantage, a huge problem for the United States. I think the reality is quite the opposite. And so the question for us is, how are we going to recapture the narrative and then eventually turn that into policy? And I'm concerned about a couple of things, not just the fact that the spectacle with ICE in Chicago and Los Angeles and New York is unacceptable. I think it's unacceptable that our law enforcement masks itself, and it doesn't. This is, to me, that spectacle should not happen in a democracy like this one. People should be able to see that they're coming, should be able to be read the rights, they should be able to give their right of appeal. There's a process, it's a legal process. That is not, I mean, some folks in the U.S. often say, oh, this is so un-American. Well, a lot of bad things have happened in America. It's not, that awful things are not un-American or are American. I think we've seen massive deportations in the 50s and 30s. Folks were sent to Mexico even if they were born in the United States back in the Great Depression and during Operation Wetback in the 1950s. So these things, we've seen them before. But I think what I'm concerned about is, look, if you look at the record of immigration in the United States, it's not just about labor markets. 25% or so of new businesses are opened by immigrants or the children of immigrants. The economy is deeply intertwined with creativity, with entrepreneurship, with businesses and wealth creation in this country. And that's undeniable. That ought to be part of the counter narrative that we have to put out there with our politicians. The second thing, if you look at the science in the United States, a great percentage of our scientists and professors, 25% or so, are also immigrants. They're just brilliant people. If you think about all the figures that have contributed to inventions in this country, not the least of which, of course, Einstein himself, were immigrants. So we have to make sure that people understand that we get a lot of, look, we just had the release of the Mexico Country Outlook last week, and one of the things that I said is, when they ask me about the conditions in Mexico, which I think are quite difficult socially, and I tell them, look, you take a Mexican bricklayer, you take a Mexican professional, whether it's a cardiologist or a teacher, you take a Mexican entrepreneur and you bring him into the United States, and they rise and shine, they thrive, because the conditions that the country offers institutionally for these folks is essentially to integrate, and they really do very well. Most immigrants, from the very bottom to the very top, do very well in this country and contribute very, very, very well to both our science advantage, our population advantage. The U.S. is unique among developed nations, from Canada to Japan to Korea to Europe to Taiwan and on, in the sense that it's the only country whose population is still growing. Most of those countries, I was in Japan and Korea in the summer, and I can tell you those are populations that are decreasing very, very quickly. Europe is at the same position. Canada is already in the same position. Do we want that future here? Do we want to stabilize the population and ensure that we have steady growth and steady, brilliant contributions by all the way from bricklayers, as Stan said, they're craftsmen, all the way up to scientists, all the way up to entrepreneurs? That's the connection with immigration. If we do not recapture that that narrative, and we allow the opponents of immigration to continue to capture the narrative, immigrants are a burden, immigrants are criminals, and they make our society worse, then we're never going to win this fight in the public policy space.
Can I add just 3 stats? I think those are great points. And so on all 3 of those, I'll just give some very quick data. On the idea of entrepreneurship, do you know percent of new businesses, the percent of the entrepreneurs in Houston that are immigrants right now, in this city, in this metro area? It's 43%. It's an unbelievable number of where new business is coming from. Nationwide, you think of the greatest American companies, our Fortune 500 companies, 46% of them were founded by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. These are, think about growth in America and what the contrast to the narrative you're going to hear in election ads and the rest about immigrants. In terms of innovation, 1/4 of all the Nobel Prize winners from America in the sciences have been immigrants. Those are great. I won't give any data on the population because you can read Bill King's book on it. But there's lots of data there.
I want to bring Liz into the conversation to talk a little bit about the impact on mental health as a result of these policies. And then I'm going to come in the audience and get you guys involved. So,
Well, among my clients in my community, again, there's this palpable anxiety and fear. And to piggyback real quickly on what Tony and Jeremy just discussed, and Stan as well, a recurring theme is the clients that I have who own businesses calling me, asking me, how do I arrange to either liquidate or just walk away from this in the event that I am arrested by ICE? I have a business, I employ people, W-2'd. Some of them are American citizens, but I myself don't have status yet. How do I navigate this? And so I'm finding myself having to reach out, to other colleagues to try and put together plans to help my clients who are either fearful that they're going to have to abandon what they built in this country and what they've contributed, or they've just reached a point where they're ready to walk away. And so I have clients who have told me, what do I do with my vehicles? They're paid off. What do I do with the mortgage? How do I navigate that? How do I walk away from my business? How do I walk away from real estate? What do I do with all of what I've built and contributed to this country? How do I navigate that? And so that is a very, very difficult conversation to have. And it just adds to this general sense of fear and anxiety that is pervasive in the community because things are so toxic right now. And I've also started seeing a lot of issues with children. I have a lot of clients who are telling me that their children are starting to exhibit signs of anxiety and depression, that they're having to go talk to the school counselor because their children are very fearful that, is mom going to be picked up by ICE while I'm at school? Is mom going to be at home when I come home from school? Are my parents going to be deported? And so now it's starting to affect the kids because the kids, they have access to social media and the news and they see what's happening in the community. It may have happened to some, people that they already know. And so it's having a ripple effect where parents are now finding that they cannot shield their children from these adult concerns anymore. It's now impacting the children, and it's a very, very negative moral injury.
well, the images of children physically being separated from their parents is just heartbreaking, and it's so hard to watch. And then if you broaden the lens to the impact on the mental health of the general public, all of us who are seeing these images on social media, I know for me personally, I have completely changed the way that I consume information. Now, I'm a journalist, and when I was on the air, I would watch news when I wasn't on the air 24/7. I'm a news junkie, and I used to wake up every morning. The first thing I would do would be to turn on the morning news. I don't do that anymore. I can't watch the news before I go to bed at night because then I can't sleep. So the impact on our collective mental health, I don't think we even know now what that is going to be for the long term, because we are inundated with these images and with what is happening, and in many cases we feel helpless to do something. So, okay, I want to get you involved. Who's got a question? Who's got a comment? And I'm going to get everybody in this conversation. I'll hold it for you, sir.
Yeah. 2 quick questions. They're really how questions. Is there any panelist who can, in bullet point fashion, give us the top 5 fixes, legislative fixes, concrete, that need to be enacted by Congress, number 1? And 2, vis-a-vis Tony's point, how do you recapture the narrative? Obviously, the Stephen Miller narrative is transcendent. What do you do specifically to recapture it?
I'd like to take number 1. there is a law that has been on the books for, gosh, I think about at least half a century, called registry. And registry is pretty much what Stan described a few minutes ago. You apply, you submit yourself to background checks, you're vetted, and if you are able to check all the boxes, okay, then you become a permanent resident. The issue is that our registry law right now dictates that you prove that you've been in the United States since 1972. So if we could move up the registry date so that you don't have to prove or document that you've been here since 1972, but perhaps 2010, 2015, whatever date you want, but let's not make it 1972, then you are creating this mechanism to let these people come out of the shadows, get vetted, which also would help law enforcement decide, okay, now we know about these bad actors that are in our midst, and we can try and start a process to remove them because now we know that they're here. So registry would, quite frankly, be the easiest legislative fix, logistically. Of course, it's always a political problem. I know that I go with AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. We lobby every spring in DC with our Congress, our elected officials, for sensible immigration reform, and we are always talking about registry. And off the books, off the record, people in each party will tell us registry, get that date changed. But it always dies, because of politics. But logistically, I think registry would probably be one of the easiest fixes. Give legislation to people in DACA, in TPS, but you could even sweep that into registry if you just change the date.
Who wants to take the second question?
Well, I wouldn't mind building on the first question a little bit. I think there are three buckets of fixes that we need that are concrete. There's a bucket of fixes like how do we take control of the system in a way so people who come here and who doesn't, that we have control of that. Right now, there's no real entry-exit thing. Someone comes, we don't know if they've left. So I think we need an entry-exit system. The second bucket is what do we do for the people who are here who are undocumented? I think a registry makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like a statute of limitations, which we have for just about every single crime. It is not this is a civil violation. There's no statute of limitations. And the third is what fixes that about what should the system look like going forward, right? You talk about high-skilled immigration. We set the number of high-skilled immigrants that we want in this country, sort of tech worker type immigrants, in 1990 before the internet was online, when our economy was 2/3 of the size. Like, what is a fix? We should have a visa system that responds to the needs of the economy at the high-skilled end and the low-skilled end, and looks at people like, do we need you right now? And our workers, what impact would this have on American workers? And so I think that's just a very concrete thing of saying, all right, let's have a responsive visa system looking forward.
Okay, we have another question here.
Okay, what do we do to get the Congress to do their job? And that is that they have to compromise. And that isn't happening. And, Imhoff tried to get a group together, and what does our president at the time say? I need it as a campaign issue. And so something that was going in the right direction is changed because of politics. And
I think when industries start losing more money than immigration restrictionists receive in donations is when you'll see a change.
I agree. The more pain we feel, and the business community is starting to feel the pain, and I predict it's going to get pretty bad the next year. Then you got the business leaders, the ivory towers, the people, the CEOs of the companies going to Trump and say, wait a minute, we need to fix this. And I can see Tillman Fertitta, ambassador to the Vatican, saying, I've got tons of hotels, tons of restaurants. I need workers. Let's take care of the hospitality. I can see the farmers saying, we can't grow crops. You're going to be buying all your crops abroad. That's national security. We got to fix that. Highways aren't getting built. Highway builders go in there and say, hey, we need help. It's happening quietly with all these associations that we have in this country, and every group has lobbyists, et cetera. They're talking, but everything is going through Trump. Congress is not going to do anything without Trump's permission. I'm hopeful
Stan.
after the midterm elections, he'll be like Ronald Reagan in '86. I'm going to fix it. Let's hope.
Stan,
If I could real quick, Linda, I'm sorry.
that's okay. Go
This
ahead.
gentleman asked another question about how can we reclaim the narrative. You can help reclaim the narrative, because I can tell you that every time we're in DC talking to elected officials, it's their mantra. They'll tell me, look, we will get 5,000 emails, phone calls, faxes a week on this end of the spectrum. You know, shut down the border, deport everybody. On the other end of the spectrum, we're not hearing from anybody. So what do you expect our elected official to do? Ignore the 5,000 people that they are hearing from weekly compared to maybe 20 or 30 emails that are in favor of immigration reform? So when I have conversations with immigrants who sometimes come with their employer to talk about options, you know, I always end with, you know, a question that I ask the employer. You know, look, you sat here and you told me for the past hour that, you know, Juan is great. He's your right-hand man. You trust him with your life. You know, what can you do to help him? And when I ask, have you contacted your senator? Have you contacted your congressperson to ask them to support sensible immigration reform? The answer is always no.
Hang on, 1 sec. Hang on, ask again.
Is there any NGO type organization in the United States with a mass communication strategy on this issue? I understand what you're saying, but that's a one-off. I'm just wondering if there's any organization with sufficient resources to really develop and implement a mass communication strategy.
I mean, the answer is unfortunately no, but getting closer. The funding in the immigration space is minimal, right? We are one of the most underfunded areas in society. So if you think about the hundreds of millions of dollars of ads that are coming in that are going to be anti-immigrant in the next year, there is no effective, there's basically no group that's doing $1 in paid ads going the other way. We at the American Immigration Council, we've had a program with the Ad Council where we actually did $100 million in ads that were about belonging and trying to approach us. We hired our first ever chief marketing officer a year ago to totally rethink how we get there. We're working with influencer programs, but we're never going to have the budget that political campaigns are going to have to run the other way. Having said that, there are groups that are, whether it's the American Immigration Council, whether it's ABIC, there are groups that are out there and they need support. And so to the question of like what you can do to change it, but also to how you can get realistically break the impasse, it starts in rooms like this. It starts with certainly donating to groups like ours, but it also starts with calling your congressman. Because one thing that happens is we need Trump to open the political window right now. But there have been political windows recently, and when they're open, we're not ready. In the first 2 years of the Biden administration, they passed a gun bill. Think about an issue that is more controversial than gun rights in America. And they didn't pass an immigration bill because we weren't ready. There are efforts right now. There's a bill called the Dignity Act by Veronica Escobar, a Democrat here in Texas, and Maria Salazar, a Republican in Florida. It's not a perfect bill. But it is a bipartisan effort. In past Congresses, they had about 60 members on it. Right now, they have about 16. What you can do in this room is encourage people to be part of bipartisan efforts. Because whenever the window opens, we're only going to fix it if we're ready and people are seriously working on bipartisan efforts. And right now, I think that's the leading of the bipartisan efforts.
Last night, go ahead, Tony.
I think one of the things that we tried to do a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, is to go to red counties in Texas. Because I think Jeremy mentioned that resistance to immigration is coming from red counties and states. People who live in Houston or New York or LA, we understand the value of immigration. We live immigration day to day. But the anxiety, a lot of that voter anxiety that they allow their imagination and their mind to be captured by the Stephen Miller generated narrative is really in the red counties and states. There's a lot of fear, but they're beginning to feel the pinch. I was working with a particular group in North Dakota. That's the reddest of the red states. And They want immigrants. They want workers. They know they don't have the workers. That's a state that is in open depopulation at this point. All the middle of the country, they're just emptying. The cities are emptying, and so they want immigrants. The problem is that they can't figure themselves out, because what I heard was instead of opening centers for immigration, to study immigration at the university there in North Dakota, they open a center, the Center for Legal and Legitimate Immigration. So the name of the center itself tells you that they really are at a crossroads for themselves, because they want the immigrants, but they don't want them undocumented. But they're not willing to put out their necks out there and say, hey, we want new paths for immigrants. So I think that maybe those of us who work on the space of immigration in New York, in Houston, in LA, whatever, we need to go to those states and talk to people, have forums like this one. We did a few of them in Lubbock and in Amarillo and in Tyler, Texas, and we try to go out there and host forums to get those people at ease and to get them to understand the value of immigration. I think intuitively they already do in many of those states, but they're not hearing from us about what the numbers are, what the contributions are. So if we get that voter segment at ease, I think we'll have a much more fertile ground to go to Congress and say, even those red states and counties know that they need immigrants.
Let me just tag on one quick thing.
Sure.
6 years ago, we started a social media platform called the Rational Middle of Immigration. But the producer, Jerry Collenberg, was just here, Gregory Collenberg, a few minutes ago, and he had to leave. But these are 16 YouTube videos. They're 12 to 18 minutes long, each on a different part of immigration. There's one on DACA. There's one on ID and tax. There's one called the Immigrant Promise, which talks about immigration from the beginning. It's to help people understand that immigration is not a bad thing. It's been, everybody in this room has an immigration story, unless you're Native American. Go back and look at your own immigration story. Look what your ancestors went through to get here, where they left. It sort of makes you realize that the current immigrants are no different, just a different era. So rational middle immigration, Google those 3 words.
It's rationalmiddle.com, easily found,
Okay.
rationalmiddle.com.
I always like to say, anyway. but I think you'll enjoy these videos. The
Stan,
business
hold,
community-
we can't hear you.
The business community paid for these. We spent about $2 million raised by many people in this room, many big organizations. They're out there. They've had several million views, but I need 100 million views. And it's time to get those out there. Like them on your social media. Push them out. Thank you.
If I could real quick, I think that everybody in this room can be a force multiplier to try and have civil discourse, dialogue in good faith. And I think if you sit down with somebody on the other side in good faith, you're going to find that there's probably a lot of common ground. A lot of common ground. When I have conversations with people, that I think the person's coming to the table in good faith, which I think is something very important to try and figure out first, because you want the conversation to be effective and meaningful, right? So if you have 2 people with different viewpoints, but they're having a good faith conversation, then there's room to find common ground. And, to Tony's point, and what Jeremy talked about as well, the fear and the narrative that is constantly being hyped up in this country about, well, immigrants are committing crime. They're murderers, rapists, drug dealers, terrorists. Why would we want them here? We need to get them out of the country. Yeah, no one disagrees with that. I haven't met anybody who would want them to be here. We all are in agreement. We don't want bad actors here. And so when you sit down and you try to have a conversation in good faith, you realize there's some common ground here, and let's see where we can take it from there to come up with some sensible solutions.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay. You guys talk a lot about statistics and all the things that you can do, but what I can't find anywhere is a fact sheet about what you're telling me. 1 page, 2 pages, something that I can sit down and send to friends and family, something that I can talk from. all the things that you talk about summarized in a very simple statistical fact sheet. It doesn't exist.
Well, if you're talking about the economics, it should be on your table. This
is Houston area.
That's Houston area.
Well,
if
I'm
you
talking about, the country.
So if you go to maptheimpact.org, you can do that for every single major city in the country, for every state in the country.
Say that again, Jeremy.
Maptheimpact.org. This data is printed right off there. It has the 100 largest metro areas. It has all 3,000 counties. It has all 50 states. It has the country as a whole. You can see exactly the same data.
Thank you for letting us know about that, Jeremy.
This is a question for Liz. So I work at an immigration law firm as well, and I've seen clients who have gone through all of the right paths and the right steps and then still ended up detained. So instead of just looking at the future policy shifts and the things that you can do for the long-term impacts, what can you do to protect those people right now?
Excellent question. Inform them of what their rights are. If they do find themselves detained, explain to them the reality of what is doable. If they find themselves detained, we have a lot of people who find themselves having to go into federal court to sue for habeas relief, which is complicated and expensive, and which most immigrants who find themselves detained can't do. But it starts with informing them, educating them, so that they can make their own free decisions that they think will work best for their family. But for people who are being detained, a lot of times it's going to come down to, do they have the resources to pursue relief in federal court? Most can't. Some do, and some are being successful, but most can't, and it's a resource issue.
Oh, okay. Yes, I am a Vietnam veteran. I was in the military, and thank you, but I attended a program last night, and I want to bring this to attention. First of all, I support everything that's been said here. But one thing that is an embarrassment to Americans, to me, is what we have done to the people that worked for America in Afghanistan. We have a number of American servicemen who have families, who have heirs, who have friends that for 20 years helped Americans survive and fight in Afghanistan. And this administration has closed the doors to allowing those people to come into this country. And I think it is an insult and an embarrassment to America not to bring our allies that helped us out of that Taliban regime, especially the women. And I want to bring that point up because I think it is an important point, and it represents what America is. And if we can't bring those people in that helped us, that fought with us, I think it is a terrible situation. That's all I want to say.
The Afghan Adjustment Act would remedy what you just described. And thank you for your service, and happy belated Veterans Day.
Thank you so much.
But the Afghan Adjustment Act is a plan to remedy what you just stated. And it had a lot of bipartisan support. It would have given a pathway to residency for Afghans that you just described. But politics keeps getting in the way. So Afghans that we gave temporary protected status to, they lost it. Afghans that we evacuated, that we gave parole to, it was rescinded. Afghans who are still finding themselves winding their way through the asylum process, it's becoming much more restrictive for them. So call your congressperson and ask them to support the Afghan Adjustment Act because it's been sitting there since about 2022 collecting dust, and it will not advance for political reasons, but it would ameliorate exactly what you just described.
Yeah,
and thank you for your support for that group.
If I could just add to, again, thank you for your service, and I think you're 100% right, both in terms of what's the right moral thing to do for people who helped us, and also symbolically, what does it say that we're closing the door to people we relied on so much? Again, this is not a Trump, I mean, certainly this administration has had many attacks, and I don't want to carry the bags for that. The Afghan Adjustment Act didn't pass during Biden. We let people in, and we gave them no way to come here. We also set up, and at our organization, we actually sued the government under FOIA to understand what was going on, and published a huge expose of this, that we set up a system of humanitarian parole, so people who weren't here yet, who were trapped in Qatar or trapped in Afghanistan or wherever they were, could come in, and only 5,000 people were able to navigate the process because it was such a terrible process we set up that it was designed to fail from the get-go. And I think that's a little bit of the question. If we can't do this for dreamers, if we can't do this for Afghans who put their life on the line, and really, I mean, if they don't come, the risk to their family is so grave, how are we going to pretend to do this for everyone else? And so I do think for things like that, 100% we should be screaming from the rooftops, because it has a huge thing to do with who we are as a nation if we're not willing to do that.
Thanks, Jeremy. What's your question? Oh, sorry.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this panel. I've really enjoyed listening to all of you. I wanted to ask if it's possible for you all to reflect a little bit beyond this administration, because we're talking about long-term consequences. So what we've seen in less than a year is a very strong decimation of our immigration, asylum, refugee system, right? As Liz was saying, the refugee system, refugee resettlement is so low now. It's going to be 7,500 a year. People who are here legally are being delegalized, right? People who are on TPS, humanitarian parole, etc. Asylum is pretty much non-existent because the border is closed. So how can a new administration rebuild a system that's pretty much being decimated? Like, it was already hard for the Biden administration to rebuild the refugee resettlement system, and it was just only one component. So what can we expect from a new administration? Thank you.
You asked the tough question.
Well, I'm not as optimistic because, I'd like to be, but I think if you go back to the early 2000s, there's been several attempts at passing immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform, and it's failed and failed and failed. And even when the Democrats have actually controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency during the Obama administration, for example, they still didn't pass any immigration reform. They just didn't manage to do it. So even when the conditions have been quite right to do that, 2008 was at the big Senate, the Gang of Eight, that bill, which I thought was right. Cornyn is now sort of, running ads saying, detaching himself from that. Obviously he has to run to the right now. The conditions have completely shifted under him. So even when the conditions have been right, and there's been sort of some sense of partisan, and I think Boehner himself now, way out of Congress, says, "Oh, I should have done it when the opportunity came." So it's going to be politically very, very difficult. I think that what we need to do, and I go back to the narrative, we need to recapture that. If we do not do that, if we do not put at ease a lot of the Americans who are skeptical about immigration, who have been allowed to get, suspicious of immigrants and immigration in general, if we don't go back to them and sort of rebuild that consensus from the ground, the conditions, when the time comes, when that window, that policy window, that opportunity opens up again, if the public is not ready, and if we do not have the proposals ready, then we're going to fail again. Because there hasn't been any immigration legislation since the 90s. I think the 90s was the last time we saw any substantive, 86, and then there was another bill in 96. But that, so that, that was the last time. It's been a very long time. The world's changed. The country's changed. What I do want to say is one thing. And what horrifies me, and I told the students a couple of classes ago, a couple of weeks ago, the MGA students, that we shouldn't really become desensitized, and we shouldn't lose our capacity to be horrified at what's going on. Because the country that Stephen Miller, and I want to think that Trump has, because he's a businessman, he might just have the sensibility a little bit somewhere in the back of his head, still alive, the sensibility to understand that immigration is good. He's made some statements lately on that score, on foreign students, on H-1Bs and things like that. But I think he's not the one determining immigration policy. It's really a conception of a country that's very, very different. And it's rubbing right up against the values that we cherish. And so I think we ought to be horrified. We ought to engage in dialogue in the places that, and we ought to prepare. We ought to have the proposals ready. And when that window opens, I think that's the time to move. And that's for the the American Immigration Council. That's for the Baker Institute. That's for us to build that right coalition and be ready to jump when that window opens, because I've seen it open and then close very quickly.
So Tony, last night, Stan and I were doing another immigration panel at the Architecture Center downtown. And Emiliano Valencia was on the panel, and he was here. I think he might have had to step out. But he was saying that what ABIC is thinking, that there's going to be a window next March, like next spring, March, April, where the Trump administration will agree to do some sort of a work permit program. That's what ABIC is sort of, believing that window is happening. Have you heard that? You agree with that? I know you were in the audience last night. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I admit I'm a little bit skeptical, but I do think this is a world where there's never been a president who had more political capital to solve this issue if he wanted to. And I just think predicting anything in this administration is crazy, because I don't know if people have seen if anyone's seen the Laura Ingraham interview the president gave 2 nights ago. It's really interesting. He comes out in favor of international students. He comes out talking about how important H-1Bs are. He comes out very skeptical of his own rate of the Hyundai plant. And
then Stephen Miller scolded him after that,
well,
I'm sure.
We'll see. It's certainly possible. But I just quickly coming back to this question, because I think it's really good, and it goes back to your great question to start. There are very concrete things we need to do to rebuild the immigration system if we don't get this in March, or even if we do. Things like rebuilding the refugee system, things like creating other lines so that people aren't getting in the asylum line, things like investing in communities to help them manage the influx of immigration. But there's some real things outside of immigration that are going to have to be rebuilt, that have to do with due process and democracy. The Velasquez case, I don't know how close people are following the shadow docket on the Supreme Court, but you can now stop someone because they are Hispanic, because they speak with an accent, because they're in a place that undocumented immigrants might work. The fact that we are sending people to gulags in El Salvador without an opportunity to contest that, this is about immigration, but this is a much bigger reality about our system right now and about our democracy. And so I do think there's a lot of restoring of faith of policies that we have to do 100% to fix our immigration system, but we also have to be very, very serious about what's been done in the last 10 months and what does that mean writ large.
I'm so glad you added that context.
Ray Gutierrez, I was in ABIC last month, I guess it was. And the critical path is that the safe house is here, right? Tony was correct. We're not attracting the people that need to listen to what we're talking about. The bigger faction is the Congress has no impact on anything anymore. And the congressmen and the senators, we were there with Salazar, right? And she mentioned something about primary opponents, All these guys are concerned about losing their job. So if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we have an uprising to identify how we can support them by losing their job because they're not doing the right thing anymore. But the bigger question is that I guess we haven't thought through the impact of the next 15 years on how this is going to impact everybody in the world. But of course, we're trying to live day by day nowadays. Any advice on how to look forward to the next, I guess somebody talked about the next 10 years. But of course, we got to get past the first year.
Yeah. Let me address that, because at some point, I mentioned the fact that we're losing an opportunity by bringing immigration down to zero to regain the scientific advantage and the competitive advantage. Look, we live in a very different place today. In 2000, the U.S. was essentially 90s, 2000. The U.S. was enjoying a period of primacy. There was practically no rival in the world. The U.S. was essentially the hegemon on top of the world. The world, I think, is flatter now, and the U.S. is one more power. India is rising, China is rising. The U.S. is part of that club. Russia is obviously a lot more resilient than we thought it was. So it's a more even field in the world. And I think we haven't yet understood that immigration is a key advantage for the United States. In fact, it is one of the most important policies the U.S. can really get right to be competitive with China and India and Russia and Europe. If Europe can get its act together, Europe has all powers have problems. We have our own problems. I talk to students about that. We clearly will have to rebuild a system of rights and process and judicial process. We got serious problems. The inequity, the inequality, the uneven income distribution that we have in this country, with 42 million people having to depend on SNAP just to eat. That kind of craziness in this country cannot stand. This is why I think Bernie Sanders in many ways resonates with so many people, because they live it day to day. You can't have a guy who's asking for a $1 trillion compensation packet and 42 million people that need that food stamp just to eat. This is not the kind of society that we want to have. And immigration, I think it's an important component. We need to redress those issues. China has other issues to redress. They're an authoritarian, totalitarian regime, really. Lots of repression, a declining population. Europe has the same issues. Russia is obviously isolated with a dictator up on top. So I'm not saying that these powers don't have problems to fix. Everyone does. We do too. Now, having said that, clearly is a flatter world. This is a place where the United States has to struggle further. Now, let me say why I think immigration is important on that. Not just because of the entrepreneurship, which I think is tied to immigration, not just because of science, which is tied to immigration, but because if we get immigration down to zero, if we do not address that issue as a comparative advantage that we've had for a very long time, we're going to find ourselves with a declining population, disadvantage in science. And I think in the United States, we are effectively underestimating how far China has advanced technologically. I think there is something that we need to look at. I know there's a narrative about the geostrategic competition and things like that. I think the Chinese are moving very fast ahead, and we're crippling ourselves by not addressing issues like immigration. So I think immigration is a key component of American competitiveness and ensuring that the United States has the workforce, the smart people, the right people to get this country, to keep this country going. And I think by not doing that now, one more thing, you cannot impose $100,000 on an H-1B visa, which provides a lot of teachers, programmers, scientists, smart people to come to this country, and at once go after the universities and defund science and defund research and defund education and beat down on that. Then it's a little bit like cutting your hand off by not doing immigration and then using a foot to cut your other hand off. You can't do it. It's going to put the United States in the long term, in the mid and long term, at a huge disadvantage. And I think immigration is an important building block of the solution to the corner that we are painting ourselves into.
Thanks for connecting those dots, Tony.
Why is there a reluctance to separating a guest worker program from an immigration policy? That'd be one question. The other question is, what can we expect out of the birthright citizenship question before the court? When might we get a decision from there?
I'm happy to take. Do you want?
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure. On the guest worker program, I'll tell you that from a political point of view, the group that does this the best by far are the people who advocate for what's called the H-2B visa, which is a lesser skilled non-farm visa. So think fisheries, timber, industries like that. What they do every year, and this is a visa that employs comparatively very few people compared to a lot of the other stuff we're talking about. but they win every year, and no one wins on immigration. And they won every year during the first Trump administration. And the way they do it is they don't go through immigration. They don't go through the Judiciary Committee. They say it's a workforce issue. They're very well organized, and they go through the Appropriations Committee. And every single year, they're very diligent. They bring members of Congress. They bring staffers to see that, to go out on fishing boats in the Chesapeake Bay and the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, and to see what it's like to shuck oysters and to pick crabs and to do that kind of work. And then they do a lot of work on the Hill, and they lobby. And every year when the appropriations bill comes up, they have champions. I mean, that's of all the things that we need. Forget about the votes. We have the votes. We need the champions who are going to insist that this goes to the floor or else. And they have that, and on both sides. So it used to be Barbara Mikulski, the Democrat from Maryland. Then it became Tillis, the senator, the Republican from North Carolina. And they get, in the Appropriations Committee, they get something called a returning workers exemption, which effectively doubles the number of visas each year. In the first Trump administration, they didn't get it all the way once. And it said, well, the Trump administration, if they want, they can issue 20,000 more of these visas. And the Trump administration said, great, we're not going to do that. And Senator Tillis started holding up DHS nominations until they got it, right? That should be a blueprint for all of this politically, right? If you can get a group of people who care very discreetly about one issue, and you can get champions for it and push it through, 100%. And so I do think that is an important lesson to go through. And I forgot your second question, but I was going to answer it. Birthright citizenship. Again, I mean, it is, every court that has looked at this has come up with one. I mean, it is not a controversial area of law. The 14th Amendment says that if you're born here, you're a citizen. It's literally called the Citizenship Clause. It has been ruled on by the Supreme Court more than 100 years ago. It's been ruled on by every other court, which is all to say I have absolutely no idea what the Supreme Court is going to do when they hear it.
What's your question?
So, good morning, and thank you for all the information. Question and a couple of statements. So, first, I think one of the reasons that probably most of us are here is because there is something about immigration that has touched our life, right? We're not here just because there's nothing else we have better to do on this Wednesday morning. So, personally, for me, immigration, my whole entire life, as you could hear from my accent, I'm not from here, I'm Colombian. And at 12 years old, I had a very impactful experience with ICE that I guess when you're that young, you try to forget things that are really ugly. So I think I did until this year when things actually just became the same thing. And seeing some of the scenes that I saw on the news brought back those really ugly memories of me running with my mom from a raid. We were legal. We had our resident card, but the fear was that we were going to get caught, we were going to get sent to a jail, and my brother that was 6 years old was at home by himself, how we were going to get back to him. Very impactful. I guess I forgot that. I ate, I went to school, kind of the same things that you guys are talking about, right? Clear background, never did anything other than go to school and work very hard to get to where I'm at today. Have two daughters, 27, 29. They're Americans. My ex-husband was American born, so no issues. But about probably February or March when things started getting really ugly, to have my daughters on the phone with me and ask me, Mommy, do we have to be afraid that you're going to be sent back to Colombia? That hurt. Liz, you were talking about having to get cards for, guess what I have in my purse? My passport card. Never had I thought that I had to do that. That's very personal. That is the reason that I'm here. More than so, Stan, something that you said is, it's going to take the business community to get us to where we're at. But something that was asked here before, and I still do not have the answer, is, what are we going to do? Where is the plan? Who do I have to pin the rose to that is going to get us to the plan? Because let's be realistic. We're not in the year 1995. We're not in 2000. We're in 2025. Each one of us here has a network. We have a network and we have social media. If we really care about this, yes, I understand that politicians have a lot of money, but we have a voice. We have social media. We need not to be afraid. And that is the reason why we're here, because people are afraid of losing their jobs. People are afraid of what they're going to do. People are afraid of, I'm not going to get that next big contract. if I go against what is being said right now. So we need to get.
So what's the question is what's the plan?
What is the plan? Who's going to give us the plan so that when that opening, we're ready for that plan? Who has that?
So we have lots of different organizations that work in this ecosystem. I'm a member of AILA, which is American Immigration Council. It's a part of that. We have lots of stakeholders who are committed to this cause, and we communicate with each other. And these stakeholders need your support so that we can come together and we can build some consensus. We already have lots of plans, lots of ideas, lots of policy papers. They're there on the books, right? And maybe they can be improved. But these stakeholders need support. You can become a stakeholder. Everybody in this room can become a stakeholder so that we can build some consensus and try to make some change. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards if you want to talk about some groups that maybe you can try and get involved with or maybe support, or maybe you're in one of those groups and we can support yours. But they're out there and there are plans. Some plans might be a little bit better than others, but we're out there and we're working, and everybody in this room can do the same thing if this is something that you're willing to commit to. But if I could say something really quickly to what this woman shared earlier, and thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you. You asked long term, what does this look like? Long term, what are we looking at? I think something that we haven't discussed this morning, and we probably don't have time, but I feel remiss if I don't mention it. Immigration is a multifaceted, issue. Religion, race, culture. What does it mean to be American? What do we want America to look like? How do you assimilate? That's all part of this mix, and we have certain segments that have control the narrative to say, well, this is what it means to be an American, and this is what you're supposed to look like, sound like, this is how you're supposed to worship. And so it's part of the mix, and it's part of what is making this such a difficult issue to address, but we can address it.
And we can't be afraid to have that conversation. So we're down to our last minute. Jeremy, you look like you want to jump in.
I want to have one very, very quick story to answer this, because I think this is such a great question. And again, thank you for telling your story. But of ways to get involved, I'll tell you one that's ours, but there are many of these. We run something called the Immigration Justice Campaign. It's a network of now more than 20,000 lawyers, translators, if you speak multiple languages, paralegals who volunteer to help represent people in detention, but both to help get people out of detention, but also then to advocate. So earlier this year, one of our volunteers we placed represented a non-binary individual named Ilya Chernov. Ilya was a Russian dissident who was with Alexei Navalny, got persecuted, had to leave. Went to Mexico, used a CBP-1 app to come in and ask for asylum, did everything the right way, came in and was thrown in prison, because that's what we do. We represented him. It's an open and shut case on asylum. He was a very prominent political dissident. We won the case, and the government decided, well, I don't think we're going to release him, which you could never do in a criminal court, right? You win your case in criminal court, you walk out that day. Ilya, they decided, well, we might appeal, so we're going to hold it, because immigration courts, which most people don't know, are not real courts. They're not in Article 3, some independent thing. They are Department of Justice employees. So then we called on our network, who are volunteers like people in this room, and put in hundreds of calls into ICE until they abandoned the appeal. And Ilya is now free, living in Philadelphia. What can you do? You can volunteer. Whether you speak another language, whether you have a law degree, you don't need to know anything about immigration, we'll train you up, we'll mentor you, or you just want to be part of the advocacy community to fight when things like this happen. Please do volunteer with us, the Immigration Justice Campaign, volunteer locally in any other group. There are lots of ways to get involved, but we need you, and you have a huge amount of power and network.
That's such a powerful example of how we can all get involved. Stan?
And very quickly, primary elections. You think about how many people in Texas vote in the primaries, about 7%. So if the far right wants to stack, support a candidate, it doesn't take a whole lot of money. So all of us need to vote in primaries. And I don't care who you vote for, just vote. And it's not this last primary, I went to my polling place, hardly anybody there. I mean, and there was some important stuff for Texas on there. But just, and tell your friends, we can't do it alone.
It's important that we all keep talking to each other, that we keep informing ourselves. The panel has given us a wealth of resources to continue the conversation, and I would urge all of you to stay involved. If you're not involved with a group that you want to work with, we just got some examples of how to do that. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking time to be here with us today. Please give our panel a round of applause.
Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.